Chris Turner stared at his laptop screen, the cursor blinking over the list item button. For the 10th year as Julian Hayes' house manager, he had reached a breaking point. Ava, Julian's on-again off-again fiancée, had stormed through the mansion again, leaving a trail of emotional and literal wreckage. So Chris was having a sale. A baccarat crystal globe, shattered and painstakingly glued back together over 50 times, was listed for 10 cents. Condition: fully flawed. An engagement ring, thrown, lost, and recovered more than 70 times, also 10 cents. The entire Beverly Hills mansion, which seemed to cursed with arguments, was the final item, a steal at 10 cents. He was about to list it when a comment appeared on the engagement ring listing. "You might as well sell me for 10 cents, too." Chris's blood ran cold. He slammed the laptop shut and scrambled to take the listings down. How did a billionaire CEO like Julian Hayes even know about his eBay account? Julian's voice, amplified by the security intercom, ripped through the silence of the storage room. He demanded Chris appear within 3 seconds, or his salary would be docked. Chris sighed, emerging from the room. It was moments like these he wished his consciousness had never awakened. The awakening had happened months ago, after he had thrown himself in front of a speeding sedan to save Julian. Lying in the hospital, the world had shifted. He suddenly understood he was living in a constructed reality, a character with a designated role. His own character description was pathetically brief: Julian Hayes' hand-picked majordomo. It was a gilded cage, his life as pale and scripted as the few words that defined it. He had waited for a system prompt, some cosmic cheat code to appear and launch him to greatness. Instead, he just went back to work, a silent observer to the high drama of Julian, Ava, and the revolving cast of their scripted lives. At least Julian was a slightly more functional version of the archetypal CEO. When other tycoons were cornering people against walls, Julian was usually just watching Chris, meticulously reassembling the crystal globe Ava had smashed. Chris had finally begged him to throw it away, pointing out that it was now noticeably smaller from all the breakage. With Julian's net worth, he could buy the baccarat factory, let alone a replacement. Why torture them both? Julian had taken a slow sip of his single-origin espresso, a smirk playing on his lips. He had told Chris that the globe's torment would end as soon as Chris stopped feeding his schedule and moods to Ava. Chris had mumbled a defense, arguing that Ava's inquiries weren't corporate espionage. She just wanted to know if Julian's taste in food had changed or if he was home. Besides, he had whispered, wasn't Julian afraid of losing her to that other guy, Liam Carter? A single, sharp glance from Julian had silenced him. He had returned to his work, his $1 million salary hanging in the balance. When they moved on from smashing the globe to throwing the engagement ring, Chris decided he'd had enough. Upcycling the broken pieces on eBay seemed like a perfectly reasonable response. Now, standing before Julian in his study, Chris tried to muster a convincing argument. Julian looked up from his desk, his expression unreadable. He asked if Chris was so desperate to leave. He'd heard from other staff that Chris had been researching retirement communities, inquiring about property values and the cost of living. Julian wondered aloud if this ridiculous fire sale was a deliberate attempt to get fired. He mused that perhaps Chris's salary was too high, making him lazy now that his financial goals were within reach. He reached for his phone, threatening to call his private accountant. Panic seized Chris. He lunged forward, grabbing Julian's arm and collapsing dramatically by the side of his chair, proclaiming his undying loyalty. He wailed about how he'd literally taken a hit for him. How could Julian ever doubt his commitment? He spun a frantic tale about planning a surprise wellness retreat for Julian, a chance to escape the stress of work and the constant fighting with Ava. He cried with such conviction that he almost believed it himself. Julian's icy demeanor thawed slightly. He still countered that he wouldn't have to argue with Ava if Chris wasn't acting as her informant. Chris's wails grew louder. He reminded Julian that they were engaged, and if Ava couldn't reach Julian, she would just call his parents, creating a much bigger problem. This seemed to strike a chord. A flicker of something, guilt, perhaps, crossed Julian's face. Seeing his advantage, Chris prepared to embrace Julian's legs for the grand finale, but Julian shot up from his chair. He agreed to the trip just to make the crying stop. He instructed Chris to make the arrangements and strode towards the door. Then he paused, hesitating before turning his head just enough to catch Chris's eye. He added that Chris was coming, too, on the company's dime. As Julian walked away, Chris felt no joy. A butler on vacation with his boss was still a butler. His phone vibrated. It was a message from Ava, asking if Julian was still angry with her, followed by a $10,000 wire transfer. The absurdity of it all was overwhelming. Here he was, the cleanup crew for their endless romantic war, and now he had to plan a vacation he didn't even want to be on. He was about to text back when an idea sparked. A wicked grin spread across his face. He accepted the money and typed furiously. He told Ava that Julian was truly heartbroken this time, devastated by the incident with Liam, especially since she had defended him. He was asking for a quiet place to escape and heal. Ava's reply was instantaneous, her concern palpable. She swore the incident was an accident and pleaded for Julian's destination. Chris feigned reluctance, mentioning how he couldn't risk his job by betraying Julian's trust again. A moment later, a new bank alert popped up, a transfer of $50,000. Chris swiftly booked a trip to a remote, luxurious mountain lodge in Colorado, a place he had always wanted to visit to scout for his own retirement. He sent one itinerary to Julian and a second, identical one to Ava, letting her pay her own way. With them fighting in the mountains instead of the mansion, he could finally have some peace. On the day of the trip, Julian complained about the destination's lack of a private airstrip, jokingly asking if Chris was planning to sell his organs. Chris, nervous that his plan would be discovered, stammered about ecological preservation and corporate responsibility. Julian slid his sunglasses down his nose, his sharp gaze lingering on Chris for a moment too long, making him squirm. It wasn't the first time Julian had looked at him strangely since the accident. Chris shook it off as his imagination. Upon arrival at the stunning lodge, where panoramic windows overlooked snow-dusted peaks, Chris was about to take his own luggage to a separate room he'd booked. Julian stopped him. With a perfectly professional smile, Chris explained that he would be in his own room, as he had no intention of being a 24/7 valet during the trip. He launched into a pitch about the lodge's elite concierge team, assuring Julian he would be well cared for. Julian listened intently, then sank into a plush armchair. He nodded thoughtfully and said it sounded excellent. He then declared he would simply divert the funds for Chris's paid vacation to the lodge to cover the cost of their services. Defeated once again, Chris dropped his bags and slumped to the floor by Julian's feet, turning on the waterworks. He lamented about his need for personal space and how Julian was crushing the spirit of a loyal, long-serving employee. Julian watched, amused, leaning back with his arms crossed. He even unscrewed a bottle of water from the coffee table and offered it to Chris when his fake sobs turned into a dry cough. The performance failed. Chris dragged his suitcase to the secondary bedroom, a new and potent dislike for Julian blooming in his chest. He didn't cancel his other room, though. It was Julian's money, after all. He checked his phone. No word from Ava. She should have landed by now. As Julian impatiently called for him to get ready for a hike, Chris reluctantly followed, his mind racing. The first stop was a trail leading to a famous mountain overlook. Julian, dressed in high-end outdoor gear, took the steep incline with ease, his long legs covering ground effortlessly. He looked back, a genuine, boyish excitement on his face, and teased Chris for being out of shape. Chris, leaning heavily on a walking stick and gasping for air, retorted that Julian spent his days in a private gym while he, Chris, was on his feet managing a chaotic household. He added sarcastically that if Julian was so fit, he should carry him up the mountain. Before the words had fully left his mouth, Julian had swept him off his feet. He held Chris bridle style and continued up the trail without breaking stride. Other hikers stared. Chris, mortified, buried his face in Julian's chest, tugging at his jacket and hissing for him to put him down. He tried to appeal to reason Julian about injuring his back, but Julian just laughed, enjoying his embarrassment. He finally set Chris down on a flat clearing, a triumphant, infuriating grin on his face. He smugly called it an act of corporate wellness, caring for an aging employee. As Julian strode ahead, Chris could only glare at his back, silently cursing Ava for her tardiness. Despite his annoyance, the hike was worth it. As they reached the summit, the setting sun bled across the sky, painting the clouds in shades of orange and violet. The air was crisp and clean. Chris spread his arms wide, feeling a profound sense of peace wash over him. Since his awakening, a persistent hollowness had haunted him, a feeling of being an accessory in someone else's life. But here, on top of the world, he felt real. The void began to fill. He looked over and saw Julian smiling at the sunset, a look of pure, unscripted joy on his face. As their eyes met, Julian spoke, his voice quiet. He told Chris that he'd chosen a good place, that he'd never felt like he could breathe so easily. For the first time, they felt less like a boss and his butler and more like friends. They were heading toward a small souvenir stand when Julian suddenly tensed, grabbing Chris's arm as if to flee. Chris followed his gaze and saw her, Ava Chun, smiling brightly, jogging towards them. Julian's instinct was to run, but Chris, caught off guard, stumbled, and it was too late. Ava reached them, her voice soft as she said Julian's name. She reached for his arm but hesitated when she saw his cold expression. The warm, friendly man from moments ago was gone, replaced by a rigid, aloof stranger. To prevent a scene, Chris quickly steered them to a more secluded spot. The drama, it seemed, could play out anywhere. Ava pleaded with Julian, her eyes welling with tears. She insisted that what he saw with Liam was a misunderstanding, that he couldn't just throw away everything they had been through. She reminded him they were engaged. Julian remained unmoved, his voice like ice. He recounted seeing her in Liam's arms, questioning how he could ever trust her. The scene was pure, high-stakes melodrama, performed in hiking boots and windbreakers. Chris, munching on a protein bar he'd brought, watched them, knowing from experience that they wouldn't stop until separated. As darkness began to fall, he debated his next move. His desire for a peaceful evening warred with his professional duty. Before he could decide, a figure burst from the trees. Liam Carter rushed past Chris, stumbling into him and grabbing Julian's shirt. "Do you have any heart at all?" Liam demanded. In the chaos, as Chris was knocked off balance, an arm shot out, wrapping around his torso, steadying him with a firm, instinctual grip. Julian held him for a second, a flash of genuine concern in his eyes, before his attention was ripped back to Liam. The disconnect was jarring. Chris quickly separated the two men, reminding Liam that it was a public place. Liam, His face streaked with tears, passionately defended Ava, explaining she had fainted from low blood sugar that day. He described her heartbreak, how she had come all this way to pray for their relationship, and how Julian's coldness was destroying her. Behind him, Ava, who had been crying silently, reached out and clutched Liam's arm, a gesture that seemed as much to protect him as to restrain him. Finally, Ava murmured that she was tired, with one last, lingering look at Julian, a classic, scripted plea for him to stop her. She turned to leave with Liam. Julian, his jaw tight, refused to look at her. As they disappeared down the path, Chris sighed in relief. He turned back to Julian, only to be met with a gaze so full of anger and resentment it made him flinch. He put on his most obsequious smile and suggested they head down before the cable car got crowded. The anger in Julian's eyes lessened, but he wasn't letting Chris off the hook. He demanded to know why Ava was there, his voice low and dangerous. On the silent descent in the cable car, trapped, Chris spun a story about trying to create a romantic, unique opportunity for them to reconcile. Julian seemed to grow even more furious. He took a deep breath, and as the car glided into the station, he finally spoke. "Maybe none of this is what I wanted to happen." Back at the lodge over a late dinner, Julian explained. The car crash had awakened him, too. He knew about his own script, his story, but he could also distinguish between the moments he was controlled and the moments he was free. Everyone around him seemed to be an automaton, moving through their designated plots. Everyone, that is, except Chris. He said that, on the mountaintop, that feeling of reality had been overwhelming. He asked, his eyes filled with a desperate hope, if Chris understood. A jolt went through Chris. The words came out before he could think. "You're awake, too?" Relief washed over Julian's face. He surged to his feet and pulled Chris into a hug so tight it nearly squeezed the air from his lungs. It all clicked into place. The strange looks, the newfound closeness away from the mansion, the bizarre, split-second instinct to save Chris from falling during the argument with Liam. Julian was only in control when Ava, his scripted co-star, was not within a certain proximity. They spent the rest of the night comparing their stories. For Julian, Ava was not the great love of his life, but a childhood crush complicated by a massive misunderstanding involving their parents and a corporate espionage plot. The engagement was orchestrated by their families to smooth things over. For the awakened Julian, the relationship was a prison of forced emotions. He had tried to break the loop by telling Chris not to give Ava his location, but Chris, unaware, had played his part perfectly. A wave of guilt washed over Chris. He finally understood the pure terror in Julian's eyes when Ava had appeared. He immediately promised that from now on, not another word of Julian's whereabouts would be shared. Their trip would be a true escape. The next day was a revelation. They explored the small mountain town, daring each other to eat bizarre local delicacies. They were just two people having fun, the lines between employer and employee dissolving completely. In the afternoon, Chris took Julian to a pottery studio. He'd discovered a latent interest in crafting things, likely a side effect of gluing a crystal globe together 50-odd times. As they sat at their wheels, Julian laughed, asking if it reminded Chris of playing with mud at the orphanage where they first met. The mention of a past Chris had no memory of, a backstory he couldn't access, left him momentarily adrift. Julian seemed to notice his hesitation. He complained loudly that his own lump of clay was a disaster while Chris's was already taking shape. Chris moved to his side, his hands covering Julian's, guiding them. He showed him how to apply gentle pressure, how to move with the clay. A sense of pride swelled in him as he helped Julian form a simple bowl. When he looked up to share the small victory, he found Julian wasn't looking at the clay at all. He was looking at Chris, his eyes shining. Their hands, caked in wet clay, were intertwined. A strange heat crept up Chris's neck. He quickly pulled away, making an excuse about needing to fire his piece, and escaped to the heat of the kiln room. Outside, trying to cool down, he saw Ava and Liam across the street. They were browsing a market stall. Liam gently fastened a handmade bracelet onto Ava's wrist and took a picture of her smiling. The scene was so natural, so sweetly intimate. It struck Chris that he had rarely seen such unguarded affection between Ava and Julian. A thought flickered at the edge of his mind, too fast to catch. He had to get Julian out of there before he saw them and the script took over again. He rushed back inside, pulled a confused Julian away from the pottery wheel, and hustled him out the back door. They were breathless by the time they got back to the lodge. Just as Chris was congratulating himself on his foresight, he opened the door to their suite to find Julian's parents sitting on the sofa. They were not scripted NPCs in this scene. Their attention was fixed solely on their son. Julian's father stood up, his voice stern. He demanded to know if Julian had canceled his wedding just to go on a vacation. He reminded him that marriage was not a game. Julian, now fully lucid, stated plainly that neither he nor Ava was truly in love with the other. But his parents, still bound by the story, couldn't understand. His father recounted Ava's devotion, how she had cared for Julian after the accident. As he listened, Chris remembered all the small moments he'd witnessed. Ava's subtle lean toward Liam, her unconscious defense of him. The flicker of insight from earlier returned, now clear as day. Ava was waking up, too. That's why she had clutched Liam's arm on the mountain, not Julian's. That's why her moments with Liam felt more real. This world wasn't just awakening for them. It was happening to everyone. Chris stepped between Julian and his father. He calmly explained that there were complications, that Julian's intentions were to prevent future heartbreak for Ava. He proposed a simple solution: let Julian and Ava speak privately. If Ava herself confirmed she wanted to call off the engagement, then no one's honor would be tarnished. His father, though still angry, agreed. If Ava said the words, he would accept it. After they left, Julian turned to Chris, looking dazed, and asked if he was hungry. Over a massive room service dinner, Chris laid out his theory. Julian was ecstatic at the idea that Ava might be awakening, that she could find her own happiness and, in doing so, set him free. The question was how to accelerate the process. They spent days researching, contacting other awakened individuals they knew of from past plotlines. A common theme emerged. The awakening was often triggered by a severe emotional shock, a moment so unacceptable that it forced a break from the script. Their answer arrived in the form of Liam Carter, who showed up at their mansion door upon their return. His brother, the former villain turned flower shop owner, had told him about them. Liam had been awake for a while, ever since a scripted corporate battle had nearly cost him his mother. He had been suffering in silence, watching the woman he loved be forced into a relationship by a story she couldn't see. Chris devised a plan, a pincer movement of emotional distress. Julian would announce he was marrying Ava in 3 days. Simultaneously, Liam would tell her his family had arranged a marriage for him, and he would be leaving the country in 3 days. The double blow of losing one man and being trapped by the other should be enough to shatter her scripted reality. Julian worried he wouldn't be able to pull it off without the script taking over, but Chris assured him he would handle the communication. Julian wouldn't even have to see her. The plan was set in motion. Liam delivered his heartbreaking news. Chris then appeared, the ever-efficient majordomo, to inform Ava of the impending wedding. He saw the shock, the confusion, and the heartbreak warring on her face. As he drove her to fittings for a wedding dress, He noticed her constantly touching a small ring she wore on a chain around her neck, her eyes scanning every room as if searching for someone. He messaged Julian, "It's working." The night before the wedding, Chris found Julian hiding in his bed. He'd meant to surprise him, but Chris had leaped onto the mattress with such force they both ended up groaning in pain. As Chris caught his breath, he realized Julian was shirtless. The memory of being carried up the mountain, of the solid muscle under his hands, flashed through his mind. He quickly wrapped himself in the duvet. Julian simply pulled the bundle closer, resting his head on his arm and looking down at him. He asked Chris to stay and talk. He then asked a question that had clearly been on his mind. Why hadn't Chris left after he'd made enough money to retire? Chris confessed he didn't know. At first, he thought it was for financial security, but that didn't feel right anymore. He said he guessed he just hadn't found the right place to go yet. Julian's voice was soft. "Can I help you look?" The sincerity in his eyes was disarming. "Wherever you want to go, whatever you want to do, I want to do it with you." Chris's heart hammered against his ribs. He turned away, muttering that Julian should focus on his own problems first, and that he'd better get a huge bonus for all this. Julian moved closer, wrapping an arm around him from behind, his breath warm against Chris's hair as he whispered, "Okay." On the morning of the wedding, Julian was a wreck in the back of the limousine. He kept asking what would happen if Ava actually agreed to marry him. Chris, enjoying his panic, coolly replied that he supposed they would get married, and that it would be a perfectly fine ending. He saw the flicker of hurt in Julian's eyes and couldn't help but smile. Just then, his phone buzzed. It was a photo from Liam. It showed him and Ava, holding a marriage certificate and kissing happily inside a city hall office. Chris had known for an hour that Ava wasn't going to be at the house. She had gone straight to Liam's and dragged him to get married. The whole procession, the tense limo ride, it was all for Chris's own amusement. Payback for the Princess Carrie and the eBay scare. When the limousine arrived at Ava's empty house, Julian finally understood. He stalked back to the car where Chris was waiting, his face a thundercloud. "You were playing me." Chris stepped out of the car, a slow, delighted smile spreading across his face. He leaned in, his fingers playfully tapping Julian's chin. "You did say you wanted to try whatever I wanted to do. This is the first thing. Any regrets?" The anger in Julian's eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, brilliant clarity. He scrambled into the car beside Chris. "Let's go," Chris said, looking at him. "I have a lot of other places I want to see." As the car pulled away from the curb, Julian squeezed in closer. "Chris," he started, a hopeful, knowing look on his face. "You knew what I really wanted all along, didn't you?" Chris just looked out the window at the road stretching ahead of them, a faint smile on his lips. That was a question he would take his time answering.